20 till noon, we have one more briefing. I think it's intended to be pretty high level briefing. We'll see.
And I'll just note as our budget director comes up today, we also have other budget work sessions planned, including on August 29th. And so I think the intent is to maybe tee up a conversation here, but we can certainly continue that conversation on the 29th because I don't want to shortchange this discussion, but I also recognize we have a lot more on the agenda. So with that, our Deputy CFO, Ed Vanino.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. My name is Ed Vanino, Deputy Chief Financial Officer. As the manager said, there's obviously numerous other things on your agenda today, so we wanted to keep our first budget work session very narrowly focused. We did receive certification from Travis Central Appraisal District, so great news on that. We're able to now finalize the remainder of our budget calendar, including tax rate adoptions. I just want to show you what that calendar looks like and make sure that your people are getting everything put onto your calendars appropriately. There are 3 financial policies that are proposed in the budget document that you were presented on August 5th. I just want to talk through what those proposed policy changes are and how the Audit and Finance Committee, what their recommendations on the policies were. And then finally, we've been already starting to have conversations with you, and we want to continue that conversation in regards to those 2 future budget work sessions, which will be budget only on August 29th and September 4th. What are the types of topics that you're beginning to think that need to be discussed further as we move forward with budget adoptions? Those work sessions are for you, and so we're seeking your feedback in regards to the types of topics and interest areas you have that you want us to perhaps present more information on, or it could just be an open-ended conversation with the council. It's your opportunity as a council, as a body, to discuss the budget in a public setting. So first off, here's your budget and tax rate adoption timeline. Everything kind of the near the top of this is all as we've discussed before. We're having the short budget work session today. We'll have our first public hearing on the budget on August 22nd. That's your Thursday council meeting. The second budget public hearing will be on August 28th. We have noticed those to have start times of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m., which was part of the discussion we had. There seemed to be a general desire to have one of the work sessions or one of the public hearings to occur earlier in the day where people who can't come in the evening would be able to attend, and then also one in the evening. So that's what we're suggesting for the start times for those 2 public hearings. The 28th will also include a variety of hearings that are required related to utility rates. So Austin Energy and Austin Water will be having their hearings on the 28th as well. The 2 additional budget work sessions on August 29th and September 4th I've already talked about. We would start both of those at 9 a.m. and this all gets us to a adoption of the proposed budget on September 10th. That's scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. As I mentioned, we do now have certification from Travis Central Appraisal District, and so you will see, I should have mentioned this, on August 28th. When we got that certification, we added an addendum item to set the public hearings on the tax rate, and we also put the item on there to set the maximum tax rate. It's not adopting the tax rate, but it's required under state law that you go through an action of proposing a maximum tax rate. So that item is on for the 28th. You can see there the tax rate hearings are scheduled for September 13th, which would be a special called meeting. September 19th would be a regular called meeting, and that would allow us to adopt the tax rate on September 25th. We would envision that as a special called meeting immediately following your already scheduled Austin Energy Utility oversight. A lot of the tax rate stuff being separated from the budget adoption is different this year due to the delay in the certification. But when you're adopting the budget on the 10th, we will be able to tell you what the tax rate will need to be to support your budget, and then you'll just have to go through the steps of formally adopting that tax rate. We did have 3 proposed changes to our financial policies that are encapsulated in our budget document. The first 2 are pretty straightforward. I'd really characterize them as cleanup items. One has to do with Austin Resource Recovery and how they budget for their post-closure care of the city's landfills. Our policy tells us to set this up as a separate standalone fund. That is just that's not the way that we're currently accounting for this work. This is just not something that really requires a reserve fund. The annual expenditures needed for the post-closure care of the landfills, that's already included. It's included in the department's operating budget, and so we're just trying to clear that up. We need to continue to fund for them, but we fund for them directly in Austin Resource Recovery's budget as opposed to transferring money over to this standalone reserve fund. That's the first one. The second one has to do with the Employees Benefits Fund, where we do maintain a stop-loss reserve amount. Essentially what the stop-loss does is it allows us, if we have unusually high number of large dollar claims where our expenditures peak, we want to make sure we have a reserves for that potentiality. Our current policy says we'll maintain a reserve consistent with what the actuary recommends. That actuarial recommendation is always right in the neighborhood of 10%, and so we just think it's a better policy to formalize. We'll maintain a 10% reserve in our employee benefits fund to meet that stop-loss need. And then finally, in response to a council resolution, we are proposing revisions to our city's tax increment financing policy. There was a lengthy report that was originally submitted to council in March of 2019. We recirculated it just last Friday so that you would have it fresh in your inbox. But within that report, we respond to the resolution request, and we also outline our proposed changes to the TIF policy to comply with what that resolution was looking for, which was ways to use TIFs to further incentivize affordable housing. There's a number of policy changes, and in your packet you actually see the current policy and the new policy. It was too messy to do it as a strikeout underlined version, but really the major changes to the policy, some of it is just rearranging the order of the policies, but really the major changes are characterized on this slide, where we'd be proposing to increase the portion of the city's taxable value that can be included in a reinvestment zone from 5% to 10%. We're currently at 4.6%, so for all intents and purposes, if the city were interested in doing another TIF for any purpose, we would need to increase that threshold. State law caps it at 25%. We're not recommending going all the way to that amount, but to increase it to 10% to open the door for future TIFs. We would also formalize a current and past practice of requiring that all tax increment reinvestment zones undergo a rigorous but-for analysis. That's really important to ensure that the public funding is coming with additional benefit to the city as opposed to just diverting funds away from the general fund for its specific purpose. And then the third major change gets to that portion of the resolution that asks for us to look for ways to use TIFs to further incentivize affordable housing. We would propose that any future project plans, TERS project plans that include housing as a component of that project plan, that we set a threshold that 20% of those units be affordable to households earning below 60% for rental units and 80% MFI for ownership units, which is consistent with the goals of the strategic housing blueprint. Finally, if you look at our current TIF policy, you'll see that it's kind of been intertwined with a PID policy, which we really don't think makes sense. And so what we want to have is a standalone TIF policy, which is what you see in your new TIF policy in there, and a standalone PID policy. We have worked with our financial advisors, treasury staff, CFO on these policy changes, and the PID policy language is very antiquated. We're not ready to bring that back to council currently, but we are proposing to separate the TIF policy from the PID policy in this TIF policy you're reviewing today. And by the end of the calendar year, staff will come back with revisions to the PID policy just to get it, to get the language modernized, and that'll be coming back to you. We anticipate November or December of this year. So those are our proposed changes. Before I turn it over to you for any questions you might have, I will note that we took the same policy changes to our Audit Finance Committee. They approved 5-0 to recommend approval of the changes to the full council for the landfill policy and the employee benefits fund policy. In regards to the TIF policy changes, they voted 5-0 to advance that policy to the full council for further discussion and consideration. So that's what we're doing here today. And then I would just remind you before we start going into the TIF questions, we really would love to somewhere today also get your feedback about those future work sessions and what kind of topics you might want to see staff preparing for.
Colleagues, it's 10 to 12. We have this briefing to finish. We have 9 items that have been pulled. We have the 3 personnel matters on executive session, plus 4 executive session items. I don't know how quickly we could get through the pulled items. I don't know how long those items are. But usually those personnel things go on for a little bit. If there was a way for us to move quickly through this stuff we have left, we should probably try to do that. But it's 10 till, and we'll work at your pleasure. I have handed out to you all something that I intend to post on the message board, subject to changes here. It's consistent with the
We
conversation.
didn't get it this way.
It's a single page. It was the first thing that got handed out this morning. I have other copies of it if we need some. It's just consistent with what we said before. We have 2 hearings. One's primarily for the afternoon, and one was primarily for the evening. So on Thursday, I would intend after lunch to call for people to speak about budget, and then continue taking people that would speak about the budget. When we stop and take break for dinner, we would note who was there and present and not able to be called. After dinner, we would take those people, but not additional people that shown up, just those people that were there in the afternoon. Then we would do the balance of our agenda, and then we could pick back up people that were still there in the evening for budget. We have a separate evening budget opportunity that is scheduled on August 28th. But this would be, I think, what we talked about doing when we talked about this 2 weeks ago. So this is what I would post absent the will of the council being different. Leslie.
That's really helpful. I also wanted to make sure that I'm reading our changed dates correctly, and maybe in the posting we could also add in, originally we had scheduled September 11, 12, and 13 for our budget adoption, and that looks like that is now, because of the tax certification delays, that's now going to be September 13, 19, and 25. Is that right? Am I reading this right?
So the proposed budget, we technically reserved September 10th, 11th, and 12th for that. We would have also reserved those same 3 dates for adoption of the tax rate, but you're right in what we're showing here. We would have just the 1 day for adoption, but we do have to have those 2 public hearings on the 13th and 19th.
So are we canceling, for these purposes, September 11 and 12, and instead doing 10, 13, 19, and 25, or
We would propose continuing to have the 11th and the 12th on your calendar, just in the event that budget adoption does not occur on the 10th for some reason.
Okay.
Or if we need to bring it back on the 11th for a second reading, or the 12th for a third reading. We like to reserve those on your calendar, but of course we're anticipating that the budget will adopt on the first day.
Okay, so we still have September 10, 11, and 12, and then the new ones are the tax rate hearings, 13 and 19, and potentially, and then an adoption on the 25th. Okay. Mayor, do you think when you post this, you could go ahead and confirm that we're still holding the original plan dates for budget
We'll do
adoption?
that.
Okay,
We'll do
great.
that.
Thanks.
Allison.
I had just a question on end times for work sessions for the budget. So it says 9 a.m. Sometimes we've gone until 5 in the past, sometimes we end at 12, and it just would be really helpful if we know we're ending at 12, if we need to schedule other meetings, or if we need to go to 5, what the plan is.
And we had the same question, so I think that's great dialogue for today. Without knowing the type and quantity of briefings or additional information you're going to want at those work sessions, we were just proposing a start time, and that it could be till noon, it could be to 5, but we don't have an agenda for those items yet. We're waiting to hear from the council, and then I think we'd have a better sense of how long we think it'll take once we have a sense from you all what topics you want to discuss at those work sessions.
Okay, so I would propose that we try and leave it open until 5, and if we finish early, we finish early. Would be, but if we know we're going to end at noon, then I would like to know that. The other thing that I just wanted to flag is for September 25th, I will be out of town at a conference, which I already have scheduled and pay for. It's a city-related thing.
And we anticipate there might be some calendar conflicts, but with the delay, we just weren't able to give you further notice. This should be a largely just ceremonial, hearing
I
and
understood. I
adoption.
just wanted
Yeah.
to flag it while I remembered.
Okay.
So, thank you.
So on the calendar, just trying to pick up, Allison, we start in the morning. If we say we're going to be all day, we may have people that are planning on showing up at 3. Right?
I'm not talking about the
internal
hearings. I'm
work
talking
Oh,
about
just
the
internal
work
hearing.
session
Okay. Sorry.
dates. If I'm, this is the most important thing we do is decide the budget. I'm totally happy to be here for the duration, but if somebody else has another plan that we're leaving at noon, I'd like to know about it in advance.
I think our suggestion would be to keep the calendars open till 5, and then, as you said, assuming that we might be able to get through those topics, we'll be able to end early.
Keep the calendar open, and then we'll decide when we're there how late we're going to go. Kathy?
I know that that you're still awaiting kind of topics for those days, and I had suggested something to you, and I just wanted to air it here, that we have a conversation during our budget session about convention center funding, hotel occupancy tax, and kind of related issues. I also just wanted to put in a plug. I think the budget question and answer is going a little differently this year, and staff are providing quick responses over the phone rather than through, or via email rather than through the formal Q&A process. My staff has submitted all of ours through the formal Q&A process, and I think it's extraordinarily helpful to do so. So if you're making budget requests, even though you have an option of doing it offline now, I would just really ask that and encourage everybody to do that. As I've shared with the manager and Mr. Vanino, I think having that kind of transparency is, number one, consistent with our process of asking our staff and our manager to share the same information with all council offices rather than just with certain council offices. I think it's more efficient because likely we're going to come up with some of the same questions, and I can't tell you how often my staff and I have gone back to that Q&A and looked at questions that other people have asked and have gotten ideas for, ways we might trim the budget or things that, important needs. I was sharing with the manager, there were a couple of years where, I usually go through all the Q&A before we vote on the budget just to make sure that there's not something that we need to attend to. And multiple times through the years, I found, somebody asked a question about youth librarians or technology over in, some of our libraries in under-resourced areas, and found out that those were places that were, going to lose programs and things like that. We were able to deal with them, and those weren't questions I initiated, those were questions other people did. So, again, I just think that is a fabulous tool we have, and would just encourage, though we have a different option this year, that we kind of follow the practice of submitting those questions. I think it's really valuable. I think the public learns from it as well, and I think generally we have much better conversations when we're sharing and learning from one another and learning from each other's questions and the information that we're all receiving.
Jimmy?
I will say to that end, staff has certainly told my office when a question we asked was substantive and needed to be a Q&A so that it could be shared. Most of the questions that I'm asking really don't rise to that level. It's can you explain this line item? Can you explain this thing? Can you explain that thing? And I understand your point about, well, maybe all that stuff should be on the Q&A, but with the limited time that we have, I'm willing to kind of barrel through this as quickly as possible and then elevate the stuff that's substantive to the Q&A process.
Yeah.
Or that you think might
Let me
actually...
clarify that I wasn't saying if you need an explanation of what something means in the budget, that goes in the Q&A. That's not at all what I'm talking about, nor is that the way we've used the Q&A in the past, for the most part. Sometimes we do ask questions like, explain how this can be used, and I'm talking about items of substance as well.
just as we
Yes.
pivot from this discussion, we'll do another round with all the offices just to get any other topics that might be appropriate for the next work session on budget specifically. And I'll also note that we'll have both of our public hearings on the budget before then. And so assuming that there are themes that we pick up from the discussion that we hear from the public that will inform how we think about the work session topic agenda as well. So stay tuned, and just want to thank you for your continued engagement as we move forward towards adoption on the fiscal year 20 budget.
Okay. All right. That gets us. Thank you, guys.